And yes, if you would not like to be recorded, feel free to keep your audio and video turned off, though we would love for you to be on video and interacting with Akua. We are so obliged to have Akua here to talk to us about how we can expand our LinkedIn presence and increase our LinkedIn network. And she's going to teach us some 3 simple steps. And I'm so excited to have her so that all of us can benefit from this. As we proceed through the session, please keep keying in your questions in the text chat. Akua will answer them as and when appropriate. And if any unanswered questions are there, we will take them up towards the end. A bit about Akua before I hand her the mic and have her take forward the session. Akua is a certified executive leadership coach from ICF, recognized facilitator, speaker, and host of the Open Door Conversations podcast. You had all received a link to the podcast in the mailer that you would have received from ICF Bengaluru chapter. As a former startup executive, she launched an online platform, Lamudi Ghana, hoping Akua I'm pronouncing it correctly, for the first African-based technology unicorn, Jumia Group. Akua has had the opportunity to live and work in US, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa, and has consulted and visited over 30 countries worldwide. In her work, she loves combining traditional coaching approaches with leadership psychology, neuroscience, emotional intelligence research, and spiritual modalities. Akua works with leaders who are juggling in a million responsibilities. Akua, you're in the right place right now. She helps leaders clarify where they should focus their time and energy each day through her company called A&M and Company. Outside of her coaching and speaking engagements, she is a regular mentor, coach, and judge, and for various entrepreneurship-focused organizations, including Stanford Seed, Google for Startups, Arlen's Academy, Founders Institute Seed Star, African Business Heroes, FemGems, the Coach Fellowship, and the Google I Am Remarkable initiative. Such a phenomenal profile, Akua. We are so happy to have you here. All over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope everyone can hear me clearly and also see me clearly. Really excited to have the opportunity to share this content with you. I have been working with this LinkedIn related content since I launched my business about 4 years ago. And so everything I'm sharing with you are things that I myself have used and also support other coaches and consultants that are interested in building their business online. So very excited to get into it. You'll see that, the next 90 or so minutes that we have together are going to be jam-packed. I'm going to be throwing a lot at you, but there's a recording, and I'll also give you an opportunity to join me for a one-on-one strategy session towards the end of this conversation if you need some additional support. So just wanted to throw that out there. So I like to title the work that I do from the perspective of usually time and energy management, because so many of the people I support typically are saying to me, they don't have the time, right? They don't have the energy, right? They're really not sure where to start. So I really wanted to walk through the 3 steps I think that every single coach should keep in mind. And what I'll be doing is sort of going through it through 2 different lenses. I'll be talking a little bit more about the mindset, and then I'll get into very tactical and tangible things that you can do immediately. So this might be one of the only sessions you ever go to where someone tells you to actually have your social media profile up, all right? I want to make sure that this is a very actionable, all right, a very tangible session. And at the end of this session, I want you to be able to make changes immediately. So please go ahead, open up your LinkedIn profile, put my little face and these slides in one little corner, and then have your LinkedIn profile in the other corner. Once again, this will be recorded, so you will not miss anything. But I think the most important thing that any person who feels like they don't have enough time, the most important thing they can do is start to take action. And so this presentation, this conversation is all about taking action. And I also will share, of course, the mindset piece behind it as well. All right, so let's get into it. I always love to invite everyone to connect with me. And I promise you there's a reason. It's not just to increase my network. While you connect with me, so at this point, you should have your LinkedIn profile up. While you connect with me, please make sure that you send me a message, because this is the number one thing I think that we sometimes forget when we're leveraging the LinkedIn platform, that you can send someone a message before you connect with them. You need to specifically use the desktop version of LinkedIn, so not on your phone, but actually on your desktop. and make sure that you send a message, because that's the way that you're going to start to build relationships. And ultimately, what you'll see with my presentation is that I am not focused on just leveraging LinkedIn for the sake of LinkedIn. We are leveraging LinkedIn to build relationships, to build community, to build audiences, right? To find potential paying clients. And so it's so important that you're always thinking about connecting. So as you connect with me, please make sure that you send me a message. And if you send me a message that says LinkedIn Masterclass, I will send you a special gift, right? So several things are happening here. You should be on LinkedIn. You should be connecting with me. And the point of connecting with me is to learn how to actually send a message. If you're having an issue with that, let me know in the chat and I can demonstrate it. But my hope is that everyone knows how to do that. And then if you send me this message, what that does is, right, that starts a relationship, right? That gives us an opportunity to connect. And I know why and how you connected with me, right? So this is how you build relationships ultimately. So if you have an issue with this, I'm just going to pause here before continuing. But let me know in the chat and I'm happy to bring it up. But my hope is that everyone knows how to do this. If you don't, feel free to let me know in the chat. Oh, I should share my link. Okay. So another thing, right, is also learning how to search on LinkedIn. So there is a LinkedIn bar. And so you can just go ahead and search my name. So AKUA, and then my last name, NYAMEMENSAH. So as you can see, I'm trying to get you to start to use LinkedIn, right? So please go ahead and use that search function. You should be able to find me. Let me know if there's an issue finding me. But once again, this is just meant to get you more comfortable using it because you will be needing to use the search bar as well. All right. Any other issues? Found me. Great. Yes. Right. You want to be able to be found. So that's another thing as well when you're thinking about your name. And I'll get into that a little later on. Right. So you want to make sure it's easy to find you. Someone can search you and find you. Even if you have a very common name, right? That's something to keep in mind. All right. I'm going to pause once again to see if we have any issues. Take a beat. If you have any issues, let me know in the chats and then we'll continue. Okay, great. Great. All right. You can also Google me. That's correct. See, this is the reason why I do it this way, because this is another reason why you want to be on LinkedIn. Because if you're on LinkedIn, people can Google you and they will find you. If anything, LinkedIn, right, is the best sort of billboard for you. Right. So thank you so much for sharing that in the chat. That's exactly why being on LinkedIn is very useful, because if someone Googles you, it's a really great way for you to share what you've done. Right. And a really great way for people to learn more about you. Right. So your LinkedIn will pop up on Google. So another reason why to make sure you have LinkedIn there. All right. So I see a few people have sent in the request. Thank you so much. And so this is just one of the mini tasks. Okay. I'll be sharing throughout this session because I want to make sure that everyone's taking action. If you have any questions about why I'm sharing these pieces, let me know. But I will be sharing a lot of the strategy behind it, because ultimately we don't use social media just for social media's sake, right? And one of the things you'll learn as I go through my content is that I actually don't really like being on social media. I'd prefer not being there. And that's why I'm so strategic. And why every single time I spend time on LinkedIn, I'm thinking very critically about what I'm doing, because there's other things I could be doing with my time. And there's other things I honestly prefer doing. All right. So hopefully by now, everyone sent me a message and is connected with me. Even if you're already connected with me, just send me a message that says LinkedIn Masterclass and I'll send you a special little gift. But I just want to make sure we're all in the same place, right? And maybe think a little bit about the mindset that some of us might have in relation to LinkedIn. And I know I definitely had these two sort of mindsets, these two sort of things that kept coming up for me. The first was really, constantly being told that, hey, you've started this coaching business. You should put yourself out there, right? You should be on that LinkedIn thing. You should be on all the social medias. And I really didn't know where to start. And really wasn't sure what to do. I also felt like there were so many other people out there. Would it really make sense for me to put what I had to share out there as well, right? That was sort of something that came up for me a lot when I was thinking about, what social media platform should I use and what made the most sense. And so I'm curious, for those of you who are on here, does that resonate? Are you a bit reluctant to leverage LinkedIn? So let me know in the chat, just type reluctant if that's something that resonates, because I know I was very reluctant. And I will say, as someone who's been working for themselves now for about 4 years, I still am reluctant. All right. A few people. Okay. So Sandeep says, no, that's fine. All right. Another thing is you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed, right? So you might feel like you don't have enough time, right? So you're not sure really where to start. You might not have enough time. And you just maybe don't even know how to balance having a business. Maybe you also work full-time, but you coach on the side. And maybe you can even take it a step further. You're a bit overwhelmed because you work full-time. You also have a coaching business, and maybe you're scared of your employer not knowing, right, that you have a coaching business on the side and you're not sure how to leverage LinkedIn for that. Should it be for my coaching business? Should it be for my full-time job? What makes the most sense? All right. So let me know in the chat if that's something that resonates. For some people, it might be a bit of both. And for others, neither of these might resonate. But for what I'm going to be sharing today, this is really, once again, the frame that I'm taking. What does it mean for a thought leader to be overwhelmed? And how can you work through that? What does it mean for a thought leader to be reluctant, right? You really do want to succeed, and you feel like leveraging social media might be a great way to potentially succeed, but you're not sure how to do that. All right. So in the chat, we've had someone says, I personally feel that social media is very much overrated. I agree, as someone who uses social media. And so hopefully by the end of this conversation, you'll learn that you can leverage social media in a way where you actually don't have to be very public. There's many ways that you can leverage LinkedIn without ever having to post a single piece of content. And that's something I talk about a lot. The next comment I see here is, I tried Sales Navigator, sent emails every day, but very limited response. So straight off the bat, I have never paid for LinkedIn. Ever. I've never used Sales Navigator. I know there are some coaches who have. I think Sales Navigator might work, but in terms of the work I do and the opportunities I've had, I've never had to pay for LinkedIn. And so everything I'm going to share with you today are not things related to paying for LinkedIn. And I will say a lot from people who get emails that I'm not necessarily works for many people. And that's the reason why I focus a lot more on network and building relationships as opposed to simply just pushing things on top of people. All right. The next comment says both, at least some parts of one, fully reason with two. Yeah. I think for some of us, it might be a little bit of both. And I know for me, sometimes it can be. The next comment says, I am not overwhelmed, but somehow don't use LinkedIn to the level that I should be doing. All right. So a part of it might also be not being sure what you can do on LinkedIn and what's possible. And hopefully this conversation will help you with that as well. All right. So thank you all so much for sharing in the chat. It's always very helpful to get an understanding of where people are. It seems like maybe these two don't necessarily resonate with everyone, but that's okay, because I think that what I'm sharing today is still going to be incredibly helpful. So I really think that this is going to be a great conversation for you to tune in if you're open to trying something new. Another thing that you'll see as I go through this content is that a lot of things I might share might seem like really obvious, but you'd be surprised the number of people that actually are not creating systems and ways to actually implement a lot of what I'm sharing consistently over time. I think LinkedIn, there's a shiny new every single week, and people are constantly jumping on the bandwagon of new things. It's great to try new things out, put yourself outside the comfort zone, but ultimately consistency is what's going to win. There is no one is not true. Is whether or not LinkedIn is working for you. So a huge part of it is actually goal setting. So I'm going to be spending a bit of time talking about that. And that relates a lot to the first step that I suggest that everyone keep in mind around having a strategy. All right. In the chat, Johnny says, I am not sure if getting enough from LinkedIn, over 6,400 connections and 6,700 followers. I'll actually be talking a little bit about this because ultimately the number of followers and connections that you have are probably not very relevant for your business needs. And maybe this is a great point for me to actually pause and ask. I was going to do this later on in the conversation, but because this keeps coming up, I'm just going to pause. And when we get to that point in the conversation, I'll skip those slides. But let me know in the chat, why are you on LinkedIn? All right. And that will let me even customize and tailor this conversation even more. But let me know in the chat, why are you on LinkedIn? To be visible and accessible to my target audience, to connect, to be visible to others, connections, since I'm a social person. Okay, these are great. Clients. Okay, so someone directly saying clients, to connect with people from diverse backgrounds, to generate leads. Initially, I thought it was a great place for business connects. Now I'm not sure anymore. Glorified Facebook. I'm a recruiter for connections, to meet other coaches and prospective clients. Okay, great. To generate leads. To be seen as a resource. Great. Great. So one of the first things that you'll see here is that everyone is kind of on LinkedIn for slightly different reasons. And this is really the first place to start, is to get very clear on why you're on LinkedIn, because no two people are going to be on LinkedIn for the same reason, or no two people are going to want people to do the same thing in terms of LinkedIn. All right. I also see developed connections, business leads, jobs, enhanced knowledge, to share my point of view. Great. So you'll see that there's some people that take it more the perspective of wanting to be a thought leader and wanting to share their content and share their ideas. So success for them might look very different for someone who maybe just wants to be on LinkedIn to learn and follow specific companies, which will be very different from someone who wants to generate leads and business from LinkedIn, right? Those are all very different reasons to be on LinkedIn. And that's why it's so important to tune in why you're on LinkedIn first and foremost. And as we go through this content today, you'll see that these are the types of specific things I'm bringing up. And I encourage you to get even more specific about what that success looks like. So if you're saying that you want to be seen as a resource, you want to be a thought leader, what would success look like? Is it a certain number of connections, right? Is it potentially a book deal? I actually knew a coach who simply wanted to be on LinkedIn because she wanted a book deal. That is it. You know, and so everything that she did was driving towards having an audience that was big enough that would make her seem very attractive to publishers. That's very different from why I'm on LinkedIn. Okay. So I'm on LinkedIn primarily because I'm interested in getting speaking engagements. All right. And facilitation opportunities. So that's a very, very different thing. I'm looking for very small opportunities because ultimately one opportunity for me, right? One speaking engagement for me makes me a lot of money, right? That's a very different thing from someone who's looking to build a massive audience to sell one book that might be $20. All right. So I hope everyone is sort of understanding where I'm coming from, but there are very different reasons why we're on LinkedIn, very different reasons why we play on LinkedIn, and everyone's doing something a little bit different. All right. And so one of the things I always recommend, and we'll get into that, is really trying to think about what is that end goal? What does that look like for you? And what does that mean in terms of the action you'd like someone to take who looks at your profile? All right. So we went off script a little bit. We're going to get back into the content, but I promise we're going to bring this all home. All right. So this is really what we're going to be talking about today. First and foremost, the top 3 mistakes that we make, and these are really related to mindset. And I already see some of these coming through in the chat. My hope is that I just provide an alternative perspective. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's wrong. I'd love to, offer a different way to look at it. And it might help you with how you think about showing up on LinkedIn and what makes sense for you. I'm be sharing my 3-step system to help you think through whatever strategy you want. And then ultimately, what I really want to do is make sure that everyone spends less time on LinkedIn, right? If you decide that LinkedIn is the place you want to be, and that's the first decision you have to make, because for everyone, it might not make sense for you to be there. But if you decide you want to be on LinkedIn, I want to share some tips that you can keep in mind to make sure that you don't have to spend that much time there. All right. But first, maybe let me take a second to actually just introduce myself and sort of give you a better perspective of sort of why I actually started creating content around LinkedIn. So I coach and, I facilitate and I speak full time. And I think it's really important for me to mention that because a lot of times you'll find people who share LinkedIn tips, right? But they're not necessarily coaching. They're not necessarily an executive coach. They're not necessarily doing this type of work, right? That they're supporting people with. So the perspective I take is of someone who spends the majority of their time supporting other leaders with their work and their business. All right. And these are things that I've used to get business. And a key part of this is that I was incredibly frustrated when I first started. All right. I remember being so angry that my existing network, all these people that I had built relationships with when I was working within the startup space, specifically in West Africa, had no interest in investing in my work. All right. It's taken 4 years for them to come back around now and be interested in what I do. But when I first started, no one was interested in investing in me and my services related to, leadership coaching, executive coaching, and speaking. So I had absolutely no relevant network when I first started. But I'm at a point now where I've grown an audience that has allowed me to get both paid and unpaid speaking engagements, facilitation opportunities, the opportunity to join different types of leadership programs, and also one-on-one clients. So I know if I can do it as someone who's incredibly reluctant to leverage social media, that anyone can do it, right? I promise anyone can do it if I can do it. And it's also given me the opportunity to work with all sorts of brands all over the world. And probably one of the biggest brands And actually sort of what helped to generate a lot of interest in my work around LinkedIn is actually being able to be a speaker at Converge. So about a year ago, I actually got to share this same content, a bit different, but this same content at Converge. All right. And this was ultimately what I was thinking a lot of the times. Like, I really want to do my own thing. I really want to work for myself, but I don't know enough of the right people who will pay me. So how can I make sure I build a network of people who are excited to work with me, excited to invest in me in the work that I do? And as I mentioned earlier on, with the work that I do, it's technically, this is not a term I like to use, but it's technically high ticket. So what that means is I don't need 1 million clients within a month in order for me to hit my income goals. I just need 1 or 2. And that's another key thing that you need to reflect on if you decide that you want to leverage LinkedIn to generate business for yourself and get clients, right? Working backwards based on the services you have, what does that mean for the type of content I produce, how I put myself out there, and how often I do it? So I used to struggle with leveraging LinkedIn. Okay, I really did. And now I have so many systems in place that really allow me to go through things a lot faster. I no longer overthink each piece of content because I have a ton of templates. I'm no longer as overwhelmed, all right, because I really have thought about the types of things I want to see on my feed. And I no longer waste time scrolling through LinkedIn, copying other coaches, right, and thinking about what other coaches are doing and how that applies to me. And it really started by being very intentional with that strategy, right? And all of you mentioned an initial strategy in the chat, and I'd love for you to continue to reflect on that. And it also wasn't by, and I think this is a really important thing to point out, these things might be helpful in the short term, but are they actually going to lead to the type of business that you're looking for and what success looks like? It wasn't by investing in expensive photographs or videos. A lot of the videos and photographs I take myself, they're very grainy. Right? It wasn't by focusing on the number of followers I had, because as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the specific strategy for me, it's not a numbers game. I don't need 500 people to buy my ebook every single month. I need 2 clients every single month in order for me to hit my income goals. And most importantly, it wasn't by having witty or color coordinated posts or by posting selfies every single day that I was able to build my following. And a key thing with this is I know some coaches who do incredibly well on LinkedIn, and they never post a picture of themselves. All right. And we can talk a little bit about sort of the strategy behind why you might post pictures or why it makes sense to post pictures. But ultimately, posting a picture may not make the most sense for whoever you want looking at your content. And that's why it's so important to get clear on what is my strategy and why am I here? All right. So I used to be that reluctant and overwhelmed coach, right, who didn't have a network. And it really was through starting to recognize that I was doing things that weren't leading to results. And ultimately, when I figured out what worked, right, and what didn't take much time, I just started to replicate that and started to build systems that allowed me to do that a lot faster. And what did that mean? That meant that I had a strategy, and I'm going to share that with you today, right? The sort of the essence of that framework that I think can work for everyone, that allows me to focus on having conversations like this. I'm now able to repurpose a lot of my content. So I'm not creating new content every single day. All right. And I'll talk a little bit about that if anyone's interested and has content already, what that could look like. And then last but not least, I batch my content, right? And my content allows me to actually do market research. So rather than thinking to myself, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on, but rather than thinking to myself like, oh, I need 1 million likes on every single piece of content, instead, what I focus on is, am I getting comments? Has someone reached out because of it, right? If it doesn't work, does that mean I need to shift something in how I talk about the different pieces of my content, right? So I use it really as market research as opposed to thinking about it from the perspective of I need more engagement, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about engagement and how your content, if you decide to have content, because once again, you do not need to post anything public on LinkedIn in order to use it and be successful with it. But if you do decide to use it, how it really can be more of market research and maybe having the mindset of market research is more effective long-term as well. All right. So what are these 3 massive mistakes? And I've sort of alluded to it. I'm going to go through this a little quicker. But once again, if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat and we'll get through them as we go through this conversation. But the first, from my perspective, and I did see someone mention this in the chat, is I think it's a mistake to focus on the number of followers as a strategy. Because as I mentioned before, depending on the type of coaching you do and the services and products you have, having more followers does not necessarily equal more money, all right? It's not a quantity game at the end of the day for a lot of coaches, especially those that are doing one-on-one coaching. But we do this because we think that's what we're supposed to do. And we think there is a correlation between having more followers and more potential clients. We also might think that there's a correlation between the amount of engagement that we get and the number of clients that we get. That's not the case. All right. I know a lot of people who get tons of engagement on their content, but they're not making any money. And that's why it's so important, once again, for us to get clear on what's that strategy and why are we there. All right. And this is what's going to happen if you continue to focus on that. You'll burn out because you've never selected a clear way forward. You're just kind of doing all the things. As I mentioned before, I like to think of content as market research, right? It allows you to engage, build relationships, see what sticks, right? And ultimately, right, if you continue to just focus on the number of followers, right, as opposed to maybe what's working, whether or not this is leading to business, right? If that's your strategy, your brand or your business is probably going to be in the same place in a couple months. So what I really would recommend that everybody do, right, and think about is, what is that one thing I want to happen on LinkedIn? And set a time period for you to check in to see whether or not that's what's happening, right? So one of the things that I used to do on LinkedIn was think about wanting to increase the number of newsletter subscribers I had. So what I did was, I thought to myself, if I wanted to increase my number of newsletter subscribers, what did I need to do? So working backwards, what did I need to do on LinkedIn in order to do that? I started to invite people to subscribe to my newsletter. If they commented on my post, I would send them a direct message that said, hey, you want to join my newsletter? I promise you that's a very tiring process. I don't recommend anyone do that, but it was a time-bound strategy, right? That I tried for a certain period of time where I recognized that that's probably not the best use of my time and energy, but it was a strategy that was time-bound, right? So that's just a quick example, not the best example, but a quick example of the ways in which you can use LinkedIn. The key thing that you also want to think about is, what is it that you want that ideal client, or the word I like to use, that ideal decision maker to take when visiting your profile or engaging with your content? And I'd love to pause here. So for those of you who shared your strategy, right? I'm on LinkedIn for visibility. I'm on LinkedIn for leads. Who is that ideal person you want looking at your profile? Let me know in the chat, because that's a key question that you want to answer. Who is that ideal profile, that ideal person? Right? It could even be maybe a person within a company, right? So is it a chief HRO, right? Is it the COO? Is it, the executive assistant of a CEO, right? Because maybe a CEO is too busy. So it's their executive assistant that might find it. Is it highly accomplished professional, right? Let me know in the chat. Who is that ideal client, that ideal decision maker you want looking at your profile? All right. Because that's a key question we all need to ask. Founders, business owners, great, right? So you have to think to yourself, what are the things they need to see in order to build trust with them, right? What action can they take if they take a look at my content or my profile? What are they likely to do, right? Because founders, CEOs, business owners, they don't have much time. So what does that mean for how you have to show up and the content you create in your profile? But that's great. Startup promoters, HR heads, CEOs, right? So HR heads are maybe looking for different things than CEOs, right? So keeping that in mind, what's the difference there? A business leader, decision maker who wants to do better for self and team. Okay, great. So you're bringing in some other elements here. Great, yeah. So this is a key thing that we also need to focus on, rather than what we describe as that spray and pray approach, right? Where it's for anyone and everyone. We need to get very clear on the who, right? So the why and the who, those are huge pieces of it. And one way we can do this is by making sure that we are blocking, unfollowing, muting, reporting, or even removing content or people or companies to teach the algorithm what we want to see. All right. And this is another huge thing that I find a lot of people don't know. So you can do two basic things kind of on LinkedIn, right? So just really generalizing here. You can connect with people, right? You can follow people, but you can also unfollow people, block people, mute people, remove, right? Or report. And I don't think that's something that we use a lot. So with the next action I'd love for everyone to take, because I think this is a super easy thing for all of us to do, is to actually go back to our LinkedIn profile. All right. So hopefully everyone has it open on here. And once again, you can let me know in the chat if this is something that you can't figure out, and go to your LinkedIn feed. All right. And what's going to happen is that there's going to be a piece of content that pops up, the first thing in your feed that pops up. Okay. And as you see that first piece of content, you're going to see 3 little dots at the top. I want you to click those 3 little dots. And I want you to, decide what to do with this content, all right? Is this content that you actually want to see? Is this not something you want to see? Is this a connection you still want to be connected with? If you decide you actually do want to engage with that piece of content, at the bottom of that post, there's going to be little icons, right? That you can engage with that post on. You can like it, you can applaud it, right? You can laugh now. I want you to engage with that first piece of content that you see on your feed, all right? And once again, please let me know if you have any issues with it. I'm happy to pull up my LinkedIn as well. And so what you're doing here is you're actually teaching the algorithm, you're teaching LinkedIn, you're teaching the social media what you want to see more of and what you want to see less of, all right? And what that's going to allow you to do is hopefully see more opportunities and more people either that, inspire you, right? Or potentially even could be a potential client. The idea here really is that you can decide what you see on LinkedIn, all right? So I'm just going to go ahead and actually open my LinkedIn to show you what that looks like. I saw a request in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and open it. And I do this, I honestly do this all the time. All right. So the first thing that pops up is my former employer. I used to work for Jumia. Okay. And so as you can see, what I can do here is I can like something, I can comment. And so if you like or comment on something, that's sort of telling the algorithm, hey, she wants to see more of this. Okay. If you don't necessarily want to see something, you say you don't want to see it. You can unfollow someone without disconnecting from them. So what that means is they'll still be in your network, right? But you won't see their content, or you can actually remove someone as a connection, all right? And this person won't be actually notified, or you can report the post if you want to, right? So if you see something that you think is harmful, you can report them. You can also save content. So I save content as well. And the idea, once again, is that all these things will teach the algorithm what you want to see more of, what you want to see less of. So as you're scrolling to your feed, it's optimized, and you should be able to start to see opportunities, right? You'll start to see potential clients maybe, and then content that maybe you want to engage in. Because for those of you who say you want to be thought leaders, making sure that you're optimizing your feed on a consistent basis will allow you to see content that you maybe want to engage with that will allow you to increase your visibility, right? Because a huge part of being on LinkedIn, right, if you're interested in that thought leadership piece, is actually commenting on other people's content. And the more you actually engage with other people's content, the more they engage with yours. It's a very, very simple little formula there. All right. I once again will pause here. Any questions about that? Okay. All right. And I'll just teach and I'll just show you just an extra thing on here. I wasn't going to do this, but I'll just go ahead and do that. Another thing you can also do is scroll down to followed hashtags. So this is an additional thing that you can actually do to optimize your feed. And if you click on followed hashtags, these are all the hashtags that I specifically have decided I want to follow, because these are all specific hashtags I think that my clients are likely to follow. So if you click on followed hashtags, these are all the ones I follow, and you can add them, add additional ones at the bottom here. So that's another way also to optimize your feed and to make sure that you are seeing content that you want to see. Because for some people, I know that LinkedIn is very overwhelming because they find the feed very spammy. They don't find the feed very relevant, but you have to teach the feed what to show you. So it feeds you opportunities, right? And it feeds you the content that you're excited to engage with. All right. I love how I'm going off script a lot on this conversation, but hopefully you're enjoying all the pieces. Okay, so let's get back into it. Okay, so that's just one way that you can start to really make sure that rather than focusing on the number of followers, what you really are doing is focusing on what you're doing on LinkedIn, right? Because that's probably a lot more important. Okay, so the second thing a lot of us do as thought leaders, we just copy, right? And I think that strategic and tactful copying is incredibly important. But the key thing here is you can't read the other person's mind and you have no idea of their strategy. So if you are going to copy, make sure it makes sense in terms of the strategy that you've decided on and the ideal decision maker right? Or ideal client you were looking for. So that's the key piece there, right? Just doing what works for other people may not just work for you. Right. And if you do this, what you'll tend to do is just scramble to try something new constantly, right? Not have a systems in place, probably be a little overwhelmed, right? And so that's why it's really so important for you to define, first and foremost, whether or not you want to create original content on LinkedIn, because it's not by force. You don't actually have to. There's so many ways in which you can actually leverage LinkedIn without creating any original content. You can engage with existing content as I shared. You can repost content and just add a bit more of your perspective. You can share other people's content. You can spend all your time in the direct messages, right? It's not by force, once again, that you're on LinkedIn publicly, all right? And if you do decide to create content, I suggest you keep 3 types of content in mind. And one of the biggest lessons I've had to learn, and I hear that this is a lot of what other service providers and coaches and thought leaders have to learn, is that you have to be incredibly repetitive. You want to create content that's constantly introducing you, content that's reinforcing your expertise, and content that's providing you with social proof. Those are the 3 basic types of content that you constantly want to be thinking about and you want to be creating. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a bit. All right. And if you're thinking to yourself, I have nothing to share, here's the thing. We all have something to contribute. We just have to decide whether we want to do it publicly or privately. All right. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. But first, let me get to the last mistake. The last mistake that we tend to make on LinkedIn is that we wait to build our network and update our profile when it becomes an emergency, when we feel like we have to do it. And that's why it's so important for us to do it sooner rather than later. Some of you on here might feel like only full-time employers look at profiles. That's not true. There are a lot of potential clients, partners, referrers, right, that could see your profile. All right. Some of you maybe are not sure where to start, and I will share my thoughts on the first places to start. All right. And then others might say, hey, I have better things to do with my time and energy. But as someone shared earlier on, if you get Googled, it's likely that your LinkedIn profile is going to pop up. So the least that you can do is make sure that your profile at least is somewhat updated. All right. This is why it's so important to make sure that you audit and update your profile. If you don't, you're going to miss out on opportunities. All right. Even more importantly, if you're creating content, right, or if someone decides to Google you, if your profile doesn't reinforce your expertise, you're going to lose out on opportunities as well. Right. So if you have a LinkedIn and you say to yourself, well, I haven't updated it in forever, it's in your best interest to just update it every so often, right? You get to define what consistent looks like. But it's so important that you keep in mind all these different pieces of yourself online, right, can have an impact on whether or not someone decides to invest their time and energy in you. All right. So this is really what I'd love for you to think about. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in some of the following slides. Make the most of it. To invest in a graphic designer or photographer in order to make sure it looks professional. All right. So let's get into what this actually looks like. So I shared it from the perspective of that mindset piece. And now what I'd love to do is share it from the perspective of the 3-step process that I take my clients through and the 3-step process that I work through as well. All right. Simple, 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 because I like to make sure everything's super simple. Step number 1, position yourself by appropriately picking a strategy, right? And we've already talked a bit about what that strategy could be, like why you're on LinkedIn and who that ideal client or decision maker is. So it's really important that you keep that in mind whenever you're doing anything on LinkedIn. The second thing is, if you do decide to create content publicly, you can do that, right? And I'll share how you can do that effortlessly. And then last but not least, complete and audit your profile. And the reason why I've done it sort of with these arrows is that this is something that you're constantly going to be doing, right? It's a cycle. What you decide your strategy is should impact your content and then ultimately should update your profile. right? And you're constantly probably going to do that. Once again, you get to decide how often you do it. I like to look at mine almost on a quarterly basis. I'm actually going to be updating my profile within the next few weeks or so, because there's some, right, and the types of feedback I'm getting. So I'm using, once again, the feedback I receive, the things I'm doing, the things I like, as an opportunity to update my strategy, to think about what my content needs to look like, and ultimately updating my profile so it reinforces whatever content I put out there. All right. So let's get into what these look like and what this means in order to build your LinkedIn profile, right? And to really build that relevant network of people who are excited, right, to either invest in you, to purchase your ebook if you have one, right? Whatever you decide your strategy is. So we already talked about why you're on LinkedIn, so we're going to skip through this. But the key here is you need to get a lot more specific. If you say you want to get more visible to who? So that what, right? If anyone wants to share in the chat, you're welcome to, but it's really important that you get very, very, very specific. As I mentioned before, one of the things that I wanted to do was increase my newsletter subscribers. So that was very, very specific, very tangible. For everyone, it might not be as tangible, but very specific, very tangible. And for about a quarter, so about 3 months, I was doing this very manual job of asking people in the DMs, hey, do you want to see my newsletter? Do you want to check out my newsletter? Here's the link. Once again, I don't recommend you do that, but I think it's a great example of how tangible and specific you can get on LinkedIn. How else can this look? Now, with the work I do, as I mentioned before, I'm a lot more interested in facilitation and speaking. What that typically looks like is trying to connect with HR leaders who eventually could potentially bring me in for a leadership program, or I could build a leadership program for them. So I'll connect with them, and I sort of have a process I take them through that I've built. So I'll connect with them initially. I'll want to have a coffee chat with them to better understand the types of challenges they're going through. And then if I feel like there's alignment, sometimes they're the ones who actually will approach me, right? Or I'll approach them and, and actually not necessarily as specific as doing the newsletter thing, but once again, I can put numbers to it. So there's a certain number of people I reach out to every single month, right? I can't force people to have coffee chats with me, but I can share, right, my link to be able to have those calls with a certain number of people. And the hope is I convert a few. But as I mentioned before, because of the way in which I work and the pricing, I don't need 10 people to work with me every single month. I just need 2. Right? And so that's how you start to really think about that strategy and working backwards to actually achieve what you're looking to achieve in your business. And that's why it's so important to, rather than focusing on vanity metrics or what everyone else is doing, for you to get very specific about why you're on LinkedIn. And as I think through this specific strategy of connecting with more HR professionals, what does that mean for the amount of time that I spend on LinkedIn, right? And for me, typically I'm finding out about these HR professionals in other places and I'm just searching them and then connecting with them. So I don't actually have to spend that much time on LinkedIn. All right. So I hope that walking through that made sense for everyone, but I just wanted to give you that other example. And if you want to share more specific examples, feel free to put in the chat and we can definitely talk through it in the Q&A as well. All right. So as I mentioned before, focus on one strategy at a time, make sure it's time bound, check in. So this HR thing is something I'm doing for the next quarter. I'm going to check in January to see how far. All right. And then make sure you define your why. And your why is not going to be like anyone else's why. Right. So some thoughts on why you're on LinkedIn potentially. It could be to accelerate trust, to get additional clients, to build your online reputation, to get more followers. And I share that other example of how there is a coach I met that just wanted a book deal. So that's maybe why you want more followers. Once again, because you want to show a publisher that if you did, put together a book, all these potential people could buy them, right? But trying to get a book deal or sell a book is not the same thing as selling a high ticket coaching offer. It's not the same thing as doing coaching or facilitation, right? All very different things. All right. And it might also be to make connections to increase newsletter subscribers. So that's something I did when I first started out. All right. So these are some of the things that you might want them to do, the action you want them to take, right? You might want to accelerate trust. So they're saying to themselves, hey, I want to hire this person, right? Or you might want to build your online reputation or brand so that the next time they remember you or keep you in mind. Or it might be similar to what I put in this last one. I want to recommend her, or this person's content and profile is written in a way where I know who to recommend her to. All right. So those are all the types of things that you can keep in mind as you're building your profile and you're thinking about the content that you're putting out there. All right. And here's the thing, ultimately, no one can read your mind, right? I say this a lot. No one can read your mind. So it's really, really important that you get very clear on the message and what you want to share with them, right? And making sure that you're sharing that message often and consistently. It might sound like you're being repetitive, but if you do decide to share content publicly, it's really important that you're sharing the same thing over and over and over again. And another thing to keep in mind, especially if you just feel like, hey, I just want to copy what other people are doing. You have no idea what's happening under the surface. And that's why I really love this image, because I think it does a good job of helping to illustrate that. You have no idea what's happening under the surface of creating that content and what went into creating that content. So rather than focusing on what everyone else is doing, focus on yourself and your own strategy and build up from that. There is nothing wrong with looking at what other people are doing and building templates and approaches based on what you see, but it's so important that you get clear on your own strategy. All right. And this leads me to the next one. When was the last time you posted on LinkedIn or sent a DM? Let me know in the chats. $10 minutes ago. Great. Last week? Today? Great. Last year? Okay. So everyone's all over the place. Okay, great. Today? Great. Thank you all for sharing. Yeah. Once again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. If you decide you don't want to be on LinkedIn every single day, just making sure that you have an updated profile maybe every quarter might be enough. But if you decide you do want to create content on LinkedIn and do it however you define consistently, I really recommend you think about batching and scheduling your content. But most importantly, as opposed to being so worried about what you're posting, what you really need to do is follow up on comments and likes, right? Especially if you're looking to build your network to potentially get some business down the line. It's more important that you're actually connecting and building relationships. And that's why following up on comments and likes and connection requests are so important. All right. You always want to keep your audience in mind. And as I mentioned before, you don't have to produce original content. But as you are creating content, and even if you are sharing content or liking content, it's important to keep in the back of your mind, what would my ideal decision maker or my ideal client think, right? There's some content that I would love to engage with sometimes, but I have to remind myself like, hey, that's not very relevant to my platform and what I share about, right? So maybe that's not something I actually want to engage with on a daily basis. So keeping those things in mind as you show up on LinkedIn, and as once again, you're teaching the algorithm what you want to see more of and less of. All right. As I mentioned before, there are two ways to add your voice on LinkedIn. You can do it publicly or you can do it privately. I actually spend most of my time privately, and that's in the direct messages. But if you are going to do it publicly, these are some ideas of things that you can do. You can promote yourself. You can share what you stand for. My favorite thing actually is to practice gratitude and to thank the people who supported me on my journey. You can teach, share something that you've learned, and you can also offer support. All right. This is just an example on the screen of sharing my ACC. And one of the things I think that's so incredible about LinkedIn is that people are actually very excited when you share that next certificate you get or that next license that you get. It always seems to get a lot of engagement. So I really recommend that you share those types of things. And it's also a way to show potentially clients who maybe value those types of certifications, the types of things that you've done to invest in yourself to also support them. All right. These are just some additional ones of things that you can keep in mind, right? So this one here on the left is someone who is saying, hey, reach out if you need some support. This next one here is sharing that they actually presented someplace, right? So these aren't very long posts. They're very short, but they're just sharing what they've done in the space. All right. Some additional ones here on the left. This is someone who's just talking about his journey and he's thanking people towards the end. This next one here put up a photograph and was saying congratulations to another person. All right. So these are all short posts, except for this one on the left. That's a pretty long post, but they don't have to be super long. And as you can see, they don't all have to have images as well. There's so many different ways in which you can actually share content. This is just the bare minimum. This is just the text piece, right? I'm not even talking about some of the more complicated things that you can even do on LinkedIn. This is just the really simple stuff. All right. So if you are looking for some content ideas, I just wanted to share some of these. You're welcome to take a screenshot. And once again, you'll also have access to the recording. But these are really, I think, some really great starters if you do want to post content publicly, right? Talking about a recent achievement, thinking about something that you believe in strongly, something that you're grateful for, something you think that might support your ideal client or decision maker. All right. So these are just some quick ideas. You're welcome to take a screenshot. And once again, if you do have a question, please feel free to put it in the meeting chat and I will get to it as we go through. All right, so let's get to the last piece, all right? And as I mentioned before, 3 basic types of content, right? If we're thinking about this more specifically, promoting yourself, selling your services and products, teaching, coaching, sharing resources, once again, all right? This is an example. We actually already went through these. So I'm gonna go through this really quick. All right. So if you can reply to an email, you can write a post or leave a comment. All right. And for those of you who are thinking to yourself, well, I just want more engagement. Here's the thing. People might respond to your post in ways that you're not even aware of, right? Someone can feel inspired by it. They can be forced to think. Not everyone will respond to your post in a visible way. But that doesn't mean that it isn't having an impact, all right? But once again, you can use that as market research and think to yourself, is there a way to potentially get people engaging more? And as I mentioned before, the best way to get engagement is for you to actually engage, all right? So that might be creating a routine where you go through your feed and you're connecting with people, you're engaging with other people's content, because then once again, they're more likely to engage with yours. And if also you're connected to the right people that you want to engage with your content, they're going to be a lot more content to engage. They're going to be a lot more likely to engage with your content as well. All right. So we're getting to the last piece here. When was the last time you updated your profile? Let me know in the chat. Today. Great. I'd love to see today for everyone. Last month, last week, 2 weeks ago, 2 months. Okay. Yeah. Everyone a little bit different. Great. Great. Yeah. So this is maybe what you're currently doing. And if you are, no, I mean, I think, that's fine. But you might want to do something a little bit differently. So you might not be making the most of each section. You might not be keeping your audience in mind. And you also might be publishing poor recommendations or not even asking for recommendations, right? That's a key thing here. This is really what I'd love for you to think about doing. Thinking about each piece of your profile very intentionally, and you don't have to use all parts of your profile. I'm going to share the top 5 areas I think are important to think and keep in mind. I also recommend that you build a reminding system. So maybe put something in your schedule, in your calendar, in your phone to go back and update different parts of your profile. And last but not least, if you do decide you want recommendations on your profile, that you provide guidance to others on how to actually recommend you and what they should keep in mind when writing your recommendations. All right. So these are the top 5 profile elements in my perspective. All right. The first is making sure that you have a customized URL. I think it's really important, especially if you want to share your LinkedIn profile. The second is making sure that you have a juicy headline, and I'll share what I call my headline formulas. The third is to have a banner and make sure that you use that banner space. The fourth is making sure that you have a looks like you picture, because I know for a lot of people, they'll put a picture up that is very professional, but doesn't look like them. If someone comes on to, video chat with you or Zoom, you want to make sure they can recognize you. So make sure your picture looks like you. All right. And last but not least, the least that you can do on LinkedIn is make sure that you have a relevant about section. So let's go through this. First of all, if you have your LinkedIn profile up and you don't have a customized URL, I'd love for you to edit your public profile and URL right now. So as you can see, there is a link to the right-hand side when you have your profile up that pops up. Click on that and edit your URL if you haven't yet, right? So you don't need any of those numbers. It doesn't need to be a super long URL. I'd recommend that you actually have it as short as possible, all right? because that makes it so much easier to share if you do decide to do that. All right. So I'd love to encourage all of you to do that right now. If you need me to walk you through that, I'm also happy to share my screen so everyone does that as well. But edit your profile URL if you haven't done so already. All right. Once again, if anyone's having any trouble with that, let me know, and I'm happy to walk everyone through it. Okay. What does it mean? Okay. It means that you're going to have a customized URL. I'm going to stop share here and start this up. It simply just means that your URL is just going to look, from my perspective, just a little prettier. And I think that's helpful if you are going to share your profile link with others. So I'm just going to open it up real quick, and we're just going to click here, edit profile and URL. Click on that, and it's up here on the right-hand side, edit your profile URL, and you can just have a custom URL. And I really recommend that you keep it as short as possible and as easy as possible. All right. Any questions about that? Fortunately, I have to stop share in order to see that. The questions. Okay. Great. Customized. Love it. I'm seeing some customized ones. Yes, yes, yes. Great. Great, great, great. Yeah. Feel free to share your customized URL in the chat. So that's the first thing I recommend that everyone do. And that's, once again, just makes it easier for you to be able to share your URL as you move forward. Okay. Because ultimately you want people to see it. All right. So let's get back to these slides. Great. Play from current slide. So that's the first thing I always recommend with your profile. All right. The next thing I recommend is taking a look at your headline. All right. And I love teaching this, actually. And maybe we can do one or two examples within the group here. But this is no longer my headline. But I think that this is, a good starting point to give you an idea of how you can strategically think about your headlines. So what I have here within my headline is I've broken down sort of the strategy behind it. I've shared my vision of what I think or like to hold in my mind as I work with my clients and sort of the why behind the work I do. I share the main type of content I have to attract clients. I then share sort of other titles I talk about myself or keep in mind. And then last but not least, I share a relevant recognition or an accomplishment, I think, that might resonate with my ideal clients, or in the case of a lot of my work, because most of my work is B2B. So I work primarily with businesses. Even with my one-on-one clients, it's typically their company or business who's paying for them to work with me. All right. And that's sort of the strategy behind one of my initial headlines. I still have my vision. And the reason why I like having a vision is that it makes it really easy for people when they get in touch to actually point something out. So I'll actually have people who reach out to me in the direct messages that say, hey, I love that bit of your headline. All right. So when you're thinking about these different pieces of your profile, really think, strategically about what's going to resonate with my ideal client or that ideal decision maker. What's a way I can make myself unique and help myself stand out? Okay. So as I mentioned before, this is sort of the formula that I use. I use vision, and then I use sort of a line break, main type of content, right? Line break, a title that I refer to myself as, another title, and then a relevant recognition or accomplishment. All right. These are some additional examples that you can use. One of the biggest questions I get when it relates to having a headline in LinkedIn is people will always ask me like, hey, should I put my credential in there? Should I put my licenses in there? And I always say no. The only reason why you should include a license or credential is if your ideal decision maker or ideal client has an idea of what those letters mean. The majority of people who personally work with me have no idea of what ICF is or what ACC means, all right, or PCC or any of those letters, right? I worked really hard for my ACC, but I do not get paid. I don't get business based on the fact that I have that credential, right? So as you think about what you put in your headline, and I also know for some people, they also put it in their name. And one of the things that I always teach or suggest is, does it make sense to have in your name? Does it make sense to have in your headline? And then for the majority of us, it doesn't make sense. It only makes sense to have those letters in your headline if you're working with other coaches, maybe as a mentor coach, or you're working with organizations who understand the relevance of those letters and your profile is targeted towards them. All right. Love to pause here to see if anyone has any questions, or if you're willing to share your headline in the chat. I'm also happy to help you think about how you can break it down based on the strategy and the types of people you want to attract. This is a lot. I'd recommend you just take a screenshot of this. You can honestly create any formula you like, but ultimately, right, you always want to be thinking, what does my ideal client think? What does my ideal decision maker think? And am I making sure I'm including things that are relevant to them, not just relevant to me, right? I'd love to put all my letters in my headline, but it doesn't make sense. Okay, we're going to move on. If anyone wants to share in the chat, you're welcome to do that. You're also welcome to do that in the last few minutes that we have the Q&A. All right. So I'd love for everyone to draft a headline, but we're going to go through this really quickly. Whoop. All right. Fire banner. So another thing I really recommend is you make use of that banner area. So these are just some quick examples I found online that I thought were really great. They're super simple, right? It doesn't need to be anything complicated. It could be as simple as having a skyline of a city that you think is impressive, but just putting something there, I think is always a really great use of that space. All right. And as I mentioned before, one of the things I also recommend is that you have a photo that actually looks like you. You're looking directly at the camera. It doesn't need to be a professional photo. I took my own photo, honestly. That's what I used, something I took. I just had great lights. All right. But it's always important that that photo looks like you. So please update your photo if you haven't done it in a while. All right. The last thing I just wanted to share was a bit more about the About section. When you are thinking about the About section, you want to make sure that you include relevant keywords. You want to break down any relevant achievements or accomplishments that you think are relevant, once again, to that ideal decision maker or client. You want to communicate the value that you provide, the problem that you solve. And I think another thing that all of us coaches and consultants could do a better job at is really talking about what sets us apart. So share your vision, your mission, your value, what you stand for. Those are things, once again, that clients are going to grab onto, and people who come to you in the DMs are also going to, grab onto as well. And I've seen that with people who reach out to me as well. They'll mention something in my About section, or they'll mention something within my headline. All right. So long story short, I know I've thrown a lot of things at all of you, but if you've put together a resume or CV, you can complete your LinkedIn profile. All right. If you take one thing away from this conversation, I want you to see how easy it is for you to complete your LinkedIn profile and build a presence to build your audience. But it starts with starting small and having that singular strategy, right? That singular intentional focus. All right. And honestly, you don't need to hire a branding agency or a professional photographer to make it happen either. You can really do it yourself. And for those of you who are thinking about, how about all those other things on LinkedIn, right? Because there's so many other ways that I could have gone with this presentation, but I really wanted to focus on the things that I think lead to a real impact, the things that really can have an exponential impact on the amount of people that are following you, will connect with you, right? That potentially lead to business. So really don't get distracted. Unless it aligns with your strategy, do not worry about it. And I know we're going to go into the questions period, and people are going to ask all sorts of questions. And the first thing I will say to the majority of you is, does it make sense in terms of your strategy and what you're looking to do on LinkedIn? Because that's the only thing that you should be focusing on. All right. So the big question is, what are you going to start with first? All right. And I'm going to pause here or end here. Thank you also very much for taking the time to join me. And I'm happy to answer any and all questions. Great. Yeah, the first question I got, as I mentioned already, I've never paid for LinkedIn. It's really that simple. I've never paid for LinkedIn. So no, from my perspective. Yeah. I really don't think it's important to join LinkedIn Premium. Once again, if it makes sense for your strategy, you're welcome to come off mute if you want to share a little bit more about why you're on LinkedIn, who your ideal decision maker is. But I really don't think it's necessary to pay for any social media platform, to be honest. Yeah, thank you all so very much. Any questions? I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. All right, so I do see a question in the chat.
Do you want me to read out the questions, Akua?
Yes, please. Yes, please. And in the meantime, what I will also do, because I know, like I said, I mentioned a lot, I will share a link to, a strategy call. If you want to jump on a call and, sort of talk through any of these pieces. If you don't see a time that works for you, just reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I will find another time that works for both of us. But please, go ahead and read out the questions.
Perfect. So Shruti asks how to engage with people who have only liked my post and not posted any comments.
Great question. Yeah. From my perspective, I always think it's great if someone's liked your post and you're not connected to them, to go ahead and add them, right? So you can go add as connection. And then similar to what we did earlier on in our conversation, make sure that you add a note where you very specifically thank them for engaging with your content and maybe ask them what they liked about it. So that's something I like to do, right? I'll go through, I'll go to a post. If someone liked and they're not connected to me, I'll click, add connection. And then I will add a note that says, thank you so much for, engaging with my content. I'd love to know, what did you like about it? Do you have any ideas for what I can create next? Once again, just an opportunity to connect with someone genuinely because they engage with your content, and then do a little market research as well.
Thank you. MG asks, I have a partner in my business, so how do I make the strategy in my personal LinkedIn page?
Great question. So the first thing I guess you need to ask yourself is, in terms of leveraging your LinkedIn page, what makes the most sense? If it is something related to your business and you have a business with a partner, maybe it is about coming together and brainstorming what specifically, maybe about the experience section or your about section, maybe what both of you will include in those sections to make sure that everyone's aligned about the value that your business, adds, the services that you have, those pieces. But I think ultimately you still want to come across as an individual. And a lot of times we look at LinkedIn and we want to come across as if we're a business, but we actually invest in individuals, right? Even when you think about a business, like, people work for specific companies because of the people, not just the business itself, right? People will leave companies ultimately because of the people, right? Everyone's like, yeah, I want to work for Google. You go work for Google, but you have a terrible boss, you're probably going to leave Google. So it's just one of those things to recognize that even if you have a business with somebody else, you still want to be an individual. So it's a question of having that conversation with your business partner and also reflecting on, if you do decide that LinkedIn's a good space for you to leverage, what will you share, right? Especially if it's from a thought leadership perspective, what will be your angle? It probably will be different from your partner's angle, right? There's a reason why you probably are both working together. You probably complement each other in a different way. So having those intentional conversations, I think at the beginning can be very helpful, because maybe how you come across and sort of the angle that you use on LinkedIn might be a bit different from your partner. Yeah, I hope that made sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Akua,
Yes.
Akua, this is Uma. See, would you let me know, how I would search for a specific content, specific consultant, recruiting consultant of a specific industry? For example, I'm looking for people from, automobile industry, a recruiter who recruits only specific industries.
Great question. Yeah. So, this is the way I'd go about it, because I do not personally pay for LinkedIn, but I guess one of the things that people could say is, hey, if you paid for like the LinkedIn, I think it's called Sales Navigator, it might be easier to find it. But once again, a lot of people don't respond very well to those cold messages. A lot of people, I just filter them. I don't even look at them personally. But the way I would go about it is thinking about, first and foremost, what are the companies I potentially want to partner with? And then from there, maybe visiting a company's profile page, so company page, and seeing the people who work within there. For the most part, recruiters, people in HR are pretty visible on LinkedIn, so it's not too difficult to find them. But personally, I would actually start with the company first. So as opposed to thinking it from the perspective of, oh, hey, can I find automobile recruiters? What is the company I maybe want to work with? And who are the recruiters and HR people within there? And, it could be just as simple as engaging with people from that company to even ask people within that company, like, hey, who's the recruiter? I'd love to connect with them. I think I have an opportunity that will be really great for them that, will be great for the company. So you can also connect with other people within the company as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Akua Jasbir asks, does Sales Navigator help in getting clients?
I don't know. I've never used it. Never had to. I think it works better for specific, based on what I've heard other people share, it works better in specific markets. So it works really well in the US, I believe. I don't know if it works very well in emerging markets. I do think in terms of LinkedIn, I think that maybe India, I feel like probably more investment has been made, but I know specifically in like where I live physically, Ghana, I don't think LinkedIn, like the paid LinkedIn services are that much better. I will say the majority of my clients are not on the African continent, which is why, once again, leveraging LinkedIn has been such a core component of my business. And as I mentioned earlier on, and I probably will sound like a broken record, I've never paid for it. But through LinkedIn, I've gotten opportunities in 5 out of the 7 continents, to give you an idea, right? And get referred to people in different parts of the world because they leverage, right? If they search me, they'll go onto LinkedIn and see my content, see my profile, and that reinforces my expertise and gets them even more excited about working with me.
Shikha Agarwal asks, what are the other ways of getting facilitation assignments through LinkedIn besides having coffee chats?
Great question. I mean, I think that if you aren't, so if you went the coffee chat route, that would definitely be going through the DMs, right? So having the direct messages, connecting with people. The other way would have to be, sharing with other people that this is something that you do. So one of the things that I try and post almost, I think on a monthly basis is sharing that I do, facilitation. But ultimately you do have to engage, right? Ultimately you do have to pitch. Like there's the only way outside of that would be to join. So there are organizations, consulting companies that you can join that could pitch you or put you as part of a scope of work and that sort of thing. But typically you do need a bit of a profile in order to do that, right? So you would have had to have some success and track record prior to having one of these consulting companies reach out to you. So that's actually one of the things that I have added, I guess you can say, to my portfolio. So I do one-on-one work. I find my own coaching and consulting and facilitation gigs. And then I also have a consulting company now that also pulls me onto projects as well.
Raju Bhatnagar asks, one can get inputs from LinkedIn about people who have searched and visited my profile. How do you suggest one should follow up on those cold visits and maybe get a 10% conversion?
Great question. I love that there's that conversion piece there. To be honest, I don't pay much attention to that. If there are people who, because I don't pay for LinkedIn, right? The whole point is it's supposed to be like this little taster, like, hey, look, this person looked at it, pay to see everything. I don't pay for LinkedIn. So you can use it as a way to connect with those people. But I think the more interesting thing is to reflect on, are those the types of people you want looking at your profile and the types of people that you want to connect with? Because not everyone who looks at your profile is going to be a potential client or be willing to pay you. So the first thing is getting very, very clear on, I'm going to sound like a broken record, very clear on why you're on LinkedIn, who that ideal client or decision maker is. And it can be a bit of both. You making sure you connect with those people intentionally. And the more you actually connect with those types of people, the more those types of people will probably connect with you as well, because what you post and who you connect with will be shown to their network as well as your network. I hope that makes sense. And that's the interesting thing I think about leveraging a platform like LinkedIn. How you engage with LinkedIn, other people will also see and will have an impact on whether or not people want to see what you engage with as well. And that's why optimizing your feed and connecting with things you think your ideal decision maker will connect with and resonate with is so very important. And that goes with also the people you connect with as well.
Anirudh is asking, do we need a coaching page when we have a LinkedIn profile?
I use my own profile personally. And then another thing that I did do was create a company page just because I wanted to have a logo in my experience, because I just wanted my experience to look pretty. But it's not something that you have to do. And I would say you just really want to focus on your profile, especially if you don't use LinkedIn that much and you haven't built the routine, you don't have that habit of leveraging LinkedIn. I think your own personal profile where you say you're a coach will probably go a lot further than anything else ultimately.
And those were the questions in the text chat. People, if you've got questions, feel free to raise your hand, unmute and ask. Go ahead, MG.
Well, thanks for this wonderful session. See, I went into LinkedIn only a couple of years back, and I have a couple of thousand people with whom I've connected. Almost 95% of them someone who make best use of this couple of thousand connects. Like all of them are not important for my business, right? So what do I do now? Is there anything you recommend that I do? I can't go through all of them now one by one to see who could be of relevance to me. So what do I do here?
Yeah. So the nice thing is that there is that bit of that search engine function that you can use on LinkedIn. So getting very clear on the types of people you maybe want to connect with. And also you can ask yourself, like, are the people I'm connected to relevant potential clients? And if they're not relevant potential clients, could they be referrers? Could they be people who refer me to my, and so once you get clear on that, what you can then do is and search and start to think about reaching out to them to say, hey, and you can be very honest and genuine. Hey, I know I never reached out to you. I'd love to connect and learn what you're up to and share what I'm doing as well.
So it's all right if we just pick, say, 10 or 15 who very potential clients, deal with them directly.
Exactly. And just direct message them. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. That's really what I'd recommend. And like I said, there's nothing wrong as well reflecting on who could potentially refer me to my ideal decision maker as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Yeah. I see another hand raised. Please go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah. So I think it's partly to answer MG's point. I think I joined LinkedIn, the current format in 2011. And at that time, I connected with people who I worked with back in 1980s.
Wow.
Those who I was able to find, right? And I connect because I like networks and I like to stay in touch with people. What I'm noticing now is that those people have moved up in their career and are in the point of making decisions to buy my kind of services. So therefore, the nurturing does not have immediate ROI, and I'm noticing that it is now paying back. Yeah. So
I love
just
that.
thought I will share that.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And as I mentioned before, one of the reasons why I got so interested in leveraging LinkedIn and building my network beyond what I had was that my existing network wasn't investing in me. It's now 4 years later where they're coming back and they're like, hey, you have these services. They sound interesting. Tell me more. Right? So that's definitely something I've experienced as well. So thank you so much for sharing that, Johnny. Any more questions?
I have one question. How do we add the banner to our profile? I mean, technically, I don't know the answer to it. That's why I'm asking.
Okay. So when you are on your profile, let me just go ahead and I'll just share my screen. Why not? Use all these lovely technologies. So this is what your profile looks like. You click, there's a little icon here that looks like a little pencil. Yeah. If you click on that, you can change the background photo. So you click change photo. All right. Were you able to find that?
I have to first go to my
log
profile,
into LinkedIn,
right?
go to your profile.
Yes, I'm there. Yeah, I'm viewing my profile, but I can see a camera picture there, not the pencil picture.
If you look to the, so we're looking at the, how would you say, the rectangular on the top, rectangular on the right
Yes,
side.
yes, I'm looking at the rectangular one. Yes, yes,
Okay.
I'm looking at the rectangle one.
And on the right-hand side, is there a
But I
little pencil or anything that looks like you can click edit?
can edit the content of my profile, but not the banner.
Okay,
On the banner side, I'm only seeing the camera over there, not the
okay.
pencil
If you
to
click
edit.
the camera, what happens?
Okay, it says add background photo.
There you go. That's it. Yes.
Okay, okay.
I guess it looks different on different browsers potentially. So I'm on Chrome. What browser are you using?
Oh, I think it's Microsoft Edge.
Okay, great. Yeah. So maybe it looks a little different.
Sure. Okay, fine. Great. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
Just a quick comment. The pencil is only after you have a profile already in place.
Oh, good to know. Thank you. Something I learned. So hopefully everyone heard that so that they know themselves.
If there are no questions, I'd like to thank Akua and Akua. You can already see the text chat flowing with comments around how relevant people found this session. So thank you so much. And people, before you drop, let me quickly introduce you to our next session. I'm going to paste it in the text chat. Do register. You will get more details about the session shortly, but right now it's about the inside out approach for effective decision making. And we'll be having Christopher D'Souza present to us on the 21st. So do register. We still have a couple of more minutes. Do let us know if any further questions. If not, then we will let Akua say goodbye and we can wrap up.
All right. Well, if anyone does have any questions or wants to connect with me one-on-one, I'll just tap my strategy link again. You're more than welcome to reach out and we can have a 15-minute chat.
So the strategy link is immediately after this, or should we have to schedule a time with you?
It's just a call. Like you schedule a time based on what works best for you. So it's my calendar.
Oh, I'll go back. Perfect. So you're in Ghana. So what time is
Right
it now for you?
Now it is 2:30, almost 2:30, 2:35, 2:25. Yeah.
Okay, 2:25 p.m.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your questions and thank you
Akua?
all. Yeah. Yes.
Akua? One last question. See, I have
Yes.
not paid for LinkedIn. So do you think it really makes a difference if you pay for the LinkedIn, or is it okay that, like, with my current profile, I can go ahead?
I've
Does it
never
make a
paid for
big difference?
LinkedIn. I've never paid
That's
for
what
it.
I wanted to know. Okay.
Yeah, I've never paid for it. Everything I've shared is nothing. I've never paid for it. Everything I've shared is what you can do. Only
Okay.
it's your time. I know your time is money, but it's only time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Akua.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Akua, for the power-packed session and full of energy. I think people have thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm still receiving comments on the chat and one-on-one comments also. So I'm super happy that we could do this for our audience. So thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you all again. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And yeah, just start small.
Thanks.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great evening. And Manu, to answer your question, there is no CCU links. There is 0.5 core competency and 1 resource development, which I will issue for people who have attended at least 80% of the session. They've stayed on. So LinkedIn will, Zoom will tell us who has stayed on.
Zoom
So
will tell you. Okay, cool.
thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We can drop Akua. Thank you so much.